So we have had some really big news in the last week or so that's come out all over the news channels. Star Wars nerds going crazy, absolutely everywhere. It's, you yourself have been having some bits that you've been put online. I see you dancing with Grogu, to be fair to the news of what's been going down. But it's been announced there is going to be a Mandalorian and Grogu film as well as a season 4. This is absolutely fantastic news. I was a bit worried that they were going to be doing just the film instead of a season 4. Even then, I don't think I would have been too mad. But the news that we are still going to get a season 4 that's then going to end with the film, I think is the prevailing theory of how they're going to do it. I am absolutely stoked about this. How about yourself? What are you feeling about this news?
Man, I've been one of those YouTube watchers that's like, okay, everyone's saying that the film is coming to light, but then it got rejected. And then all of a sudden on a random Tuesday morning, Star Wars likes to post that we're getting the next movie in theaters, and it's The Mandalorian and Grogu. And I love this. Obviously, like you said, I had my Grogu puppet down and we were going ham. But I can't wait for it. I think it's a great idea, and I'm just glad it's happening.
Absolutely. Fantastic news. Any expectations in terms of, we know obviously we're building towards the Dave Filoni Mandoverse film that's going to be wrapping up all the stories of the Mandalorian, Boba Fett, Ahsoka, even Skeleton Crew. Apparently it's going to be wrapping that up, which, hopefully we'll get Skeleton Crew at some point soon. Still know nothing about this series and when that's going to be dropping, but it's going to be wrapping up all those stories. So anything you want to see in season 4 of the Mando and the film they're doing that builds towards that storyline?
I think my main thing is I just want a fresh start. I kind of want it to be along the lines of season 1 and season 2. I feel like season 3, we kind of expected what was going to happen. With season 1 and 2, it was brand new every week. So, plus with the film, I don't think we're going to have as much filler. And I think every scene is just going to be getting after it. And I hope we get to see a new villain that can maybe actually defeat Din Djarin and Din Grogu, and then meet up with Thrawn and kind of take alongside of each other. And then the big movie, Filoni's movie, comes out. So I hope it's just a precursor to Filoni's film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Are we expecting Thrawn to play a part in season 4 or the film at all? I mean, that's what we're building up to, isn't it? He's going to use like the Thanos of this era for Star Wars in a way. Everything, all roads lead to the showdown with Thrawn. So, we had the Shadow Council, was it, in season 3 of Mando with Moff Gideon and the rest? And obviously they were talking about waiting for Thrawn to come back. So presumably we are going to get, I'm not expecting him to be the big bad of the series. Maybe that background overarching bad guy like Thanos was for the Avengers. But surely we're expecting to see a bit of Thrawn in this series in the film.
Yeah, maybe we'll catch up with him. The entire Mandoverse likes to catch up with other characters set in the universe. So maybe we can see him behind the scenes, but maybe if we don't, I think he's just going to be kind of a silent killer.
Speaking of Thrawn, we got some news. He's come from Ahsoka Series 1 in live action, and sneakily in the news that was announced in the Mandalorian Grogu snapshot that Lucasfilm and Star Wars gave us about it, there was the news in there as well that Ahsoka Season 2 is also in development. This was the first sort of real official confirmation that we were going to be getting Season 2. It was up in arms a bit in terms of whether that was definitely going to do it or whether they were going to do something that just led towards the film. But again, some more fantastic news for us Star Wars nerds. Surely everyone's got to be psyched for Ahsoka Season 2. How about you?
Yeah, it's just like Mando and Grogu. I think it's going to be a good thing to see them back again, but mainly for Baylan and Shin to see what's next for them. Obviously, it's Ahsoka's show, and I love Ahsoka's character, but I think Baylan and Shin just really stole it for me. Plus, live action Thrawn, can't go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would obviously expect Thrawn to play a decent part in season 2, even though again I think he's going to be more background, and they're obviously going to focus on Ahsoka and Sabine in the other galaxy, with obviously Baylan and Shin, and they'll obviously focus a little bit on I think Hera and Ezra, and obviously in the Star Wars galaxy there'll be maybe a slightly side part story going towards it, but all roads lead together. it's all coming together. I think I can't wait for this. I'm super excited. Hopefully, we can get this sooner rather than later. I think the rumors for the Mando Grogu film have said that development's starting this year. So I'm guessing maybe 2026, or maybe 2020, maybe 2025 we get the series, and 2026 the film. Or obviously, if they roll, they use the film to be the finale of the series, it all rolls into one. So who knows? We'll obviously have to wait and find out. But one other quick bit of Star Wars news that's been sort of creeping around the last couple of days was that Daisy Ridley's new Jedi Order film was going to be delayed indefinitely. Someone pointed this out to me a couple of days ago, and I was like, okay, interesting, because apparently the writer was deciding he was going to focus on his Peaky Blinders movie instead. Lucasfilm apparently have come out and said this isn't true, everything's still on track, it's all still going ahead, no delays. So any thoughts on that one, or is it just, I didn't even know where these rumours come from sometimes, for then Lucasfilm to have to come out and deny it straight away and say everything's all good, we're still on track. But any thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah. That's kind of how I look at it too. You kind of have to take every piece of news, unless it's from Star Wars itself, with a grain of salt. But I think what's like Charmin Obaid-Chinoy, like obviously she's getting some backlash right now. And I think the Peaky Blinders, like new movie that they're trying to focus on, I feel like that is just to kind of dumb that down a little bit. That way they can kind of stop all that noise. But that's just kind of what I take from it. I hope it's still on its way, because I want it to be kind of salvaged.
I think it has the potential to obviously be a really good film.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit of Din Grogu showing up. I think I asked you that question before, maybe, as well, but I was like, I can't see how they wouldn't want to take an opportunity. Mando himself would be, if this is set 15 years after the end of the sequels, Mando himself, because we're at the stage where it's about, 20, 25 years before the sequels now in the Mandoverse.
Yep.
So, add an extra 35 years onto that, Din is going to be very old himself. So if not, have gone out in a blaze of glory somewhere down the line. And so Din Grogu's got to start off somewhere, and maybe after all this time without Din Djarin around, he decides to go back to the Jedi. Who better to and obviously the boost in sales and toys would not exactly be a bad thing for Lucasfilm to have Grogu showing up in that either, would it? So
yeah, it's a win-win.
Welcome to the Galactic Core Podcast. Here to review the latest films and TV shows from all your favorite intergalactic universes. Now, it's time to get your geek on. Please welcome your host, the prophesized chosen one. It's Andy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Galactic Core Podcast. We are back with another fantastic episode and a friend of the show returning to continue our review of Star Wars all through everything. So every film, every TV show that's been done, I'm making my way through it all and reviewing it. And to do all of the prequel films, we have, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, Clan Brandolorian. How you doing, buddy?
What's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm all good. Thank you so much for coming back. Today we're going to be reviewing Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. You obviously joined me for Episode 1 that came out, I think it was end of November. That was when that episode then came out, or start of December, something around then. And obviously we're going to be doing Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith as well. I know we're both looking forward to having a good chat about that one.
Oh, yeah.
But, got a little film in the middle of that to take care of first of all. Before we get to that, I had asked you, since we were covering all prequel films, to each time we review a film, to give me your top all-time favourite Star Wars projects. So we're doing your top 3. Last time round, we had number 3, which is The Mandalorian. This time we're doing your second favourite all-time Star Wars project. Hit me with it. What's number 2?
All right. It's Return of the Jedi.
Ooh, interesting choice.
It was a very close teeter-totter with Empire Strikes Back. Love the film, but I have to go with Episode 6. I feel like as a kid, besides Episode 3 and Episode 1, of course, with Maul, I loved everything about Return of the Jedi. I love Luke. I love Vader's arc. I love Endor. It's just a great film. I love seeing Luke with a green lightsaber. The whole Jabba's palace. Just it's a perfect film to me. So it's almost clear as day why it's number 2 for me.
That's a really interesting choice, to be fair. I think it's one of those ones that it seems to be slightly underrated, Return of the Jedi, for some reason. I mean, in terms of the original trilogy anyway, because everyone always tends to have, Episode 4 is the reason people got into Star Wars in the first place. It's obviously what ignites their love for it. Episode 5 is, generally considered to be, for the most part, I think, one of the greatest films of all time, let alone Star Wars film. So Return of the Jedi seems to get a little bit sort of dropped below those in people's rankings for the most part. I really love that film, to be fair. I think it is what it is up there. I think I put it in my top 5 or 6, maybe, for the simple reason that I love the inclusion of the Emperor in this film.
Yes.
Obviously, original Episode 4, there was no Emperor. Episode 5, we just get him as like a hologram, and we learn that Vader actually has a master, which was a big shock to all of us because we're thinking he's the big bad, so to speak. And then the interactions that we get between the Emperor and Vader and the Emperor and Luke in this film, to me, are the standout bits of the entire thing. Plus, you get to see, it's the first time we really, if you're watching it in release order, you get to see how cunning the Emperor is, because he's thought about everything, he's seeing ahead, the way that he planned for the rebellion's plan to turn up to the second Death Star and try and blow that up. Even though they obviously succeeded in the end. But it's just more the fact that, he anticipated the fact that they would be arriving. He had his hidden force on the other side of the moon. To me, that is what makes this film as good as it is. Plus, obviously, in that final battle, the interactions between Vader and Luke. And Vader taunting Luke constantly, trying to get him to turn. And obviously Luke almost giving in to his emotions. And he does have a flying fit of rage at the end, which actually allows him to physically beat Vader in the fight, doesn't he? But then Luke has that fantastic moment where he's been wearing all black. And obviously, he sees the fact that he's now got a metal or a mechanic hand, the same way that his father is, so he's slowly turning into him if he falls to the dark side. And obviously he throws his lightsaber away and he says to the Emperor, I'm a Jedi like my father before me, I will not turn. And obviously the flap on his shirt opens up to show the white underneath, to show that he's still a Jedi and the light side is still there all along. I think this is a very underrated part of the film, and just an underrated film in general. I mean, what else about it that really brings you in to have it in such a high spot?
Yeah, see, like, especially the robe scene where it shows white. As a kid, I was just like, why do all my action figures of Luke have that white showing? And I'm like, well, that's just so weird. But, when you get older and understand the film and like the writing and the direction it's going, like it almost gives you goosebumps just because it's so, perfect. But adding the Emperor, I think it's a huge deal that we know, Vader's the big bad, obviously. And he has someone who, is in more control than he is. Vader only plays a certain amount of the parts, as the Emperor sees everything. And, the Emperor is, probably the best chess player we've ever seen in film. Besides Gus Fring, in my opinion, from Breaking Bad, I don't see it. The Palpatine is the one who really plays chess while everyone's playing checkers, like they say. So, I mean, it's just, I love the fact, Boba Fett's one of my favorite characters, and, we get to see him for like 4 total minutes in Return of the Jedi, but it's the best 4 minutes you could ever ask for. But, and pretty much, I mean, that's kind of what will wrap that for me. I feel like we've kind of discussed everything that's just perfect about Return of the Jedi, but a lot of my friends who know that Return of the Jedi is top 3, top 2 in my list, they always give me crap because they're like, man, you got little teddy bears that take up about 30 minutes of that film. And it's like, man, those are some dope teddy bears. So don't get that twisted.
I may have to slightly side with your friends on that one. The Ewoks were always the one bit of the film that I was a bit unsure about. I was always a bit like, I remember being a bit young and be like, fuck the Ewoks, man. Like, those little bastards, like, how could they take them out? But we also know how shit stormtroopers are, and it's kind of almost it's almost making sense and balances out that a bunch of fucking teddy bears can take out stormtroopers. So, I think the older I get, the less I begrudge it and just accept it for what it is, which is a bit of fun. I always love all the theories that go around. It's like, oh, they had a dress for Leia. Does that mean they've eaten people before and just kept the clothing afterwards? Or there's always that, like in the celebration scene at the end where you see like the Ewoks and there's one like using stormtrooper helmets as bongos. And they're always people are always like, did that mean they ate the stormtroopers that died? And I'm like, surely they just killed them and took their helmets. Like,
Yeah,
why do they have to eat everyone? What's going on here?
I hope so.
Yeah, sort of working with a cannibalized Ewoks. That was a bit scary. But although Battlefront 2, I don't know if, how much you play that, obviously, but Ewok Hunt, do you ever play that on Battlefront 2?
I have played it. I am horrible at that game, and I don't get it, and it pisses me off because I love Star Wars, so I think I should be good at the game, but I'm terrible at the game. But I do love that mode.
I'm a big Battlefront 2 player. I have been for years. I don't play it so much anymore, but man, Ewok Hunt is always scary to me. It's sort of like, don't like running around that forest trying to stay out of the way of those little fuckers whilst they're just coming for you and the horns going off everywhere and stuff. And then the battery light just runs out and you just got to wait for it to recharge. You just stood there in the middle of the dark going, okay, I hope there's nothing near me. Ewoks equal scary. Stay away from them, kids. I haven't prepared you for this because I wanted you to give me something off the top of your head for it. But next week, obviously, or in the next episode, we're going to be doing your number one pick, which I have a pretty sneaking suspicion I'm going to be able to guess what that number one pick is. But something outside your top three, give me an honourable mention for something that you absolutely love but isn't as part of your top three.
Rogue One. And the reasoning for that, it could be a 3, but I just think The Mandalorian just hits a little home for me more than Rogue One does. But, I mean, Rogue One is, it's one of those films. It's almost perfect. And it's, I love the character of Jyn Erso. I think, especially with her dad being the one that ultimately had the brains for the Death Star and such a powerful weapon. And, I mean, the Death Star has been around for over 40 years in our world. So just to know that Death Star has an origin story. Characters are great. The planets are great. I love the visual effects, and I love when we get to new planets, it actually says, what planet it is in text. So that's it's Star Wars, but just a little bit different. And the direction of the movie is beautiful, and you can't ever leave out the Darth Vader hallway scene.
I mean, that is something that is the literal cherry on top of the cake for Rogue One, isn't it? Maybe the one thing that everyone talks about the most from the film because it's one of the most brutal Star Wars scenes of all time.
Yeah.
And this isn't even Vader in his. I mean, we talk about when was Vader in his prime because he was Vader for about 25 years or so, and you could probably say that maybe 10 years before that it was when he was absolutely this prime in terms of what was left of his physical condition when he was probably around the early 30s sort of age.
Right.
But fuck me, in that scene, he's absolutely brutal. I remember being in the cinema, and when that scene happened, I jumped out of my chair. I was like screaming in the cinema. I don't like to make a lot of noise in the cinema. I'm typical British. I like to sit there in silence and just soak it all in and absorb it. I'm not like the American theatres that you see chanting and shouting everything at scenes.
Yeah.
But that scene, I was jumping. I jumped up and shouted at the cinema screen. I just could not believe that scene had just happened. And what a way to end the film. So, and that followed by the CGI layer as well. It just kind of like tops it all off for an ending. So, I could talk about Vader all day long. I don't want to get distracted from the fact that Rogue One itself is an absolutely phenomenal film overall. And what I love about that, because obviously I'm going to be reviewing it at some point, so I don't want to go too much into it, but I think what I always love when I rewatch it is that this film was about the connection between them and wanting to fulfill and do something worthwhile with their lives. And when they get to Scarif, each person seems to, because they talk about obviously, the Force is with me and I am one with the Force, but the Force is different for each of them. Like Jyn has her mother's like Kyber crystal necklace, and you've obviously got several characters that are sort of connected with the Force there. But when they're on Scarif, the Force sort of seems to get everyone exactly where they need to be before they get killed and do what they need to do to help the rebellion move on. And that's kind of what I loved about the film as well, is that, the Force is there, that even if no one gets a happy ending at the end of it, they're all furthering everything along for the greater good. And we see that I think in the Andor series as well, that we're starting to cast in towards the character that we see.
Right.
But in the fact that he's edging everything towards the greater good and moving forward, and with the prison stuff as well. even though it was fantastic that we obviously get to see what they were building in the prison was being used to build the Death Star. But it's just the fact that, bringing everyone together for the greater good, to get everyone out there and start thinking, we can beat the Empire. We can do something about this. And that's what Rogue One's all about for me, is bringing everyone together in that sense and doing everything for the greater good, even if it means sacrificing themselves, which so many in the rebellion did do against such a bigger empire. So,
right.
Fantastic film. Great pick. Love that one. So,
yeah, it's like I said, it's right there, but it doesn't make the cut.
I know what you mean. I think I have it top 5, to be fair. If there was like 3 more of those Vader scenes littered throughout the film, it would probably be top 3 for me.
Oh, yeah. Easy.
But we've got a great film to discuss. Love it or hate it, it is a really important part of the prequels, as every part of the prequels is, to be fair anyway, but so much happens in this film that is really important. So just going to read off a quick plot recap of the film. So we've got the story set 10 years after the Phantom Menace, as thousands of planetary systems slowly secede from the Galactic Republic and join the newly reformed Confederacy of Independent Systems, led by former Jedi Master Count Dooku. With the galaxy on the brink of civil war, Obi-Wan Kenobi investigates a mysterious assassination attempt on Senator Padme Amidala, which leads him to uncover a clone army in the service of the Republic and the truth behind the separatist movement. Meanwhile, his apprentice Anakin Skywalker is assigned to protect Amidala and develops a secret romance with her. Soon, the trio witness the onset of a new threat to the galaxy, the Clone Wars.
Boom.
And of course, some really famous lines that came out of that film.
It's rough, it's coarse.
Yeah, it gets everywhere, and this is the worst flirting I've ever seen on my life. She married him after that. So,
it's crazy. It gives anyone hope. It gives anyone
literally. If that scrawny little whiny kid can use that as a pickup line and it works on someone as beautiful as Padme Amidala, then anyone in the universe has hope. Trust me. This film came out 2002. I remember going to a midnight screening of it at a cinema with some friends. It was one of the first ones, because I think I remember said to you with episode 1, I got to see that whilst I was on holiday in America. So it was 3 months before it came out over in the UK. This time I got to go with friends. We went to the midnight viewing. Loads of people were dressed up. The local radio station was there interviewing people coming in and out before and afterwards. It was kind of a really big deal. The first sort of really big cinema event that I personally got to go to. The first time we ever got to see Yoda fighting on screen as well. That was huge. I remember when he walked out and ignites his lightsaber, the crowd went wild, so to speak, in the British sense, of course. But your feelings on this film, first time you watched it. I mean, set the scene for us, to be fair. What was, do you remember when the first time was that you saw this film?
So I was actually 5 when this came out, but I do.
You young, beautiful bastard.
Yeah. I was, just only 5 years old. And I was in kindergarten actually, because I remember, I do remember being at the theater. I remember waiting in line, and then I remember, bits and pieces. I don't remember the whole thing, but I do remember bits and pieces. And it was just a normal afternoon. But obviously growing up, a few more years, able to understand it more on DVD, watching it back. And I loved the Battle of Geonosis. I would skip everything in the beginning and go straight to the Battle of Geonosis. So if Attack of the Clones is, in my mind, the Battle of Geonosis is there every minute of the day. But for that being the first time, it's one of those films, especially as a kid, you can really understand, the dynamic of people coming together and seeing what happens ultimately. Count Dooku, big, scary, bad guy. He knows the tactics of the Jedi and he's still using them. And I loved a young Boba Fett. It's beautiful. Loved Jango, finally seeing Boba's father and how he operated. And then better yet, there's a million Jangos, so you can't be mad. But yeah, I mean, as a kid, I loved the film, but it was definitely the Battle of Geonosis that stuck out to me more than anything.
Nice. Yeah, and it is one of the biggest battles in Star Wars that we get. I mean, in terms of especially on-screen lightsaber battles as well,
Oh yeah.
we've seen some more in games and other projects where they do a few sort of the old school Sith and Jedi battles. But in terms of on-screen Star Wars, this is by far the biggest Jedi battle that we ever got to see. If memory serves, they rocked up to Geonosis with 300 Jedi, and then they leave with what, like 10?
It's crazy.
So the fact that this is, people obviously look at the droids and think the especially since we see in the Clone Wars animated series here, the droids are goofy. Like, they're there for a bit of comedic relief in terms of the voices and stuff like that, and that they didn't quite have enough money to make them as efficient as they wanted to. So that's why we get them as they are. But still, when you've got that many surrounding the Jedi, even some of the greatest Jedi of the time of Mace Windu and Kenobi and a young Skywalker, the fact that they take out so many, and we even see what was like Barriss Offee's in there, Luminara's in there, Kit Fisto's in there, and Kiel Mundi, they're all in there. So it's absolutely devastating to see like how badass the droids can be in terms of taking people out. So, but what are your overall thoughts on this film? It's generally considered, I think, for the most part, and especially from the investigation I've done into where each film sort of ranks, this generally tends to be considered the worst out of the 9 main saga films, and generally regularly appears at the bottom of the list. How are you feeling about that?
You said worst out of the 9?
That's the ratings, and for the most part, the general consideration of it. Because maybe not anymore, given some of the sequels, but I think out of the original 6, it was always considered to be potentially the worst.
Out of the 6, I could see it, but I think it would be number 6 if we're doing all 9. But we're sticking to Attack of the Clones, so I can see why. I think, an hour of the movie is just, set in stone, Anakin pulling this horrible riz, as they call it today, on Padme. And it doesn't work at first. She kind of shows that she's like creeped out a little bit, or like, hey, like, we can't do this, like, what are you doing? And then like 2 scenes later, it's like, oh, it worked. So it's like, oh, okay. But, it's a cool dynamic at the end. I get it. But Anakin and Padme had to be together at some point. So I felt like it was just, it was put in there, and I understand how some original trilogy fans are like, I don't like the prequels, and I get it, with some of these points. But if you think about it, could you imagine, episode 2 coming out in 1980 with the technology we had? Like there couldn't have been battle droids. Like what would you have done? It's just a weird thing to think about, but I mean, yeah, that's how I look at it.
It's a fair point with the CGI, because even they had to invent new things to be able to do the CGI for this film. There were some things that were groundbreaking, and some people look at it. I hate the way people look at it nowadays and go, "Oh, it doesn't hold up." Well, it was 20 fucking years ago. Like stuff that was made 20 years ago, 30 years ago, isn't always going to hold up technologically to what we see nowadays.
Yeah,
and what we have the ability to do nowadays. So, given that at the time it was groundbreaking, and that they actually had to invent new things to be able to then implement them for this film. I think one thing that always shocks a couple of people when I say that in this film, not a single piece of clone armor was physically manufactured. Every single bit that you see is CGI'd. There was not a shoulder pad, not a chest plate, not a helmet. Nothing at all was manufactured. It was all done as CGI. And for the most part, you can't really tell. You think that at some point there's going to be some people with just a few of them there, and maybe they then use CGI to replicate them. And everyone else is like, nope, every single bit of that is CGI. Kind of reminds me a little bit sometimes of that scene in Return of the Jedi where Vader's coming out the shuttle ship, and you see the big like squadron of stormtroopers that are stood in the hangar bay, and that was a fucking painting.
Yeah,
you don't even like realize. So I think when you don't realise that, and people give it a lot of crap sometimes for the CGI in this film, and I don't stand for that, to be fair. I think the CGI still works when you're looking at it, especially because obviously you do get those idiots that kind of go, well, if you look at the original trilogy that's set, 20 years later, and everything looks duller, it doesn't look as good, the weapons and the spaceships don't look as good. And you're like, well, the Empire suppressed the galaxy for 20 odd years at this point. The whole point was to run down the galaxy to make sure they're the ones in control, not the people. So the people don't have the best tech anymore. The planets have been run down and they've been exhausted of all their resources for the Empire. And
Exactly.
so it makes sense to then have something like the prequel trilogy that looks shinier, looks newer, everything looks better because it was still in the time of the glorious Republic. So I don't really stand for the talk about the CGI. So
Nah.
Go back to your point there about the Anakin Padme bit, just because it always makes me laugh every time I watch this film. It's like that sort of bit when after they've had dinner and they're sat by the fireplace, and Anakin starts his little sort of like Riz attempt at her, and he's like, I think about you all the time. You're always in my thoughts, and she's always telling him, no, we can't do this, and it could be our secret. And she's like, we'd be living a lie, and I'm like, woman, have you seen how you're dressed? I don't like normally pointing out that kind of thing. But if you're trying to reject someone, you don't have an evening sat by the fire staring at each other's eyes dressed like that. Like, it's like if I'm showing off my calf muscles to my wife. She's got a thing for calf muscles, I should say. Just dangling them out in front of her, and she's just like, oh, why? How are you tempting me like this? And I'm like, so it's the same thing in reverse. It's just, how can you be looking that fine and then think that that's going to put him off? Like, you're staring into each other's eyes, sat on the sofa by a fireplace, like dressed like one of the most gorgeous women in the galaxy. Like, fuck me, give the guy some, like, he's 19. What's he there? Yeah, he's 19, isn't he?
Yeah,
so
19.
Give the guy his hormones a break, for God's sake. Stop dressing like that.
He's a growing boy, okay?
Yeah, in many ways.
Plus, you got to think how easy of the acting could it have been? You know, a young Hayden Christensen looking at Natalie Portman that way. I mean, yeah. I get it, but I mean, I feel like that makes his acting job even easier.
Yeah,
to be fair, it's real.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's dive a little bit into some of the characters then. So let's start with Padme, since you've been talking about her. I actually think there's a bit of improvement with Padme in this film, because I know that before we spoke that maybe Natalie Portman's acting is a bit wooden at times in episode 1, maybe because that's just the sort of, I think maybe the wrong word, but stuck up queen sort of way of going about it. In this film, she automatically, even though it is 10 years on, so she automatically looks a bit older. She's more composed. She's now a senator for the Republic rather than the Queen, and so she seems to have matured a lot, and she's moved on. And she's obviously, being a thorn in the sides of a lot of people because they want to kill her.
Right.
Your thoughts on Padme in this film?
Yeah, I feel like I was the advocate for saying, it was just kind of just very bland, but I feel like that sets the tone for her character. You can definitely see where Leia gets her political side. It's definitely all through Padme. But in episode 2, it seems that her character has had a lot of growth, and especially right off the gate, we get the Naboo starship blown up right at the beginning, and the way you could see Natalie Portman's Padme Amidala show some sadness for Corday, who just got blown up and died, because basically that's what she's put in the job for, is if something happens, she's the one that's supposed to play Padme. So I think it's really cool that right off the bat it's already a different character, but you can tell she's grown a little bit. And even throughout the whole film, shutting down Anakin, once they get to Geonosis, she has to trust Anakin and basically be by his side to survive. But obviously I love the part when Anakin's like, how's Padme? And then Obi-Wan looks up and he's like, seems to be doing well, so we get to see her, be a badass, because even in the Lego Star Wars games, it's kind of like you can just kick ass with Padme's character, and you're like, does she do that? And then you think of the movies, you're like, oh yeah, she does kick some ass on Geonosis. So I think the acting just went up the next level, to the furthest.
Yeah, I think she did a really good job, Natalie Portman, which, given where she was from a couple of, because obviously it was only 2-3 years before episode 1 came out, and she seemed to have matured herself as a bit of an actress in that time as well, not just the character of who she was playing.
Right.
because we see her from things like Mars Attacks, which was the first real thing I seem to remember her from. And then she was obviously in a young doing that, and then going into episode 1, and then rolled into episode 2. And yeah, definitely a much bigger improvement. And Padme starting to prove why she was such a force in the Senate. And pain in the arse on a lot of other people's backsides in this film. She does a really good job. Still a bit cheesy, I think. It's rolling around in the field with Anakin always still gets me a bit. I think there is no escaping that between Padme and Anakin in this film there are some definite cheeseball moments. It's created a lot of memes, and we're never going to get away from it. We've already mentioned the sand moment. But it's just after all these rejections of him, and then just before they're about to go out to be sentenced to death in Geonosis, she's like, I kind of do love you, actually. I was just sort of like kidding you around, kiss me now, sort of thing. I was like, oh, fuck's sake. It's always at the last moment when death's on your door that you're going to admit that you actually love him.
Right, come on.
At least throw the guy a bone, tell him a bit earlier, for God's sake. He's pouring his heart out to you. So she makes the interesting decision, though, I think, is like when they're on Tatooine and Kenobi's in trouble, and the Jedi Council tells Anakin to stay put, and they'll send someone over. They'll send someone out to Geonosis, and she's like, "Your mandate is to protect me, and so you have to come with me, and I'm going to go save Kenobi." So the fact that it just shows that you don't need to be a Jedi, have the powers to be brave and to do the right thing. She is one of those forces for good that I think gets overlooked so much. We'll talk about it obviously when we do episode 3, and the way that she dies at the end of that film. But the rest of the time, she's such a force for good, and that she's always doing the right thing about it. And we see it so much through the Clone Wars animated series as well. She refuses to sit down and take a back seat, even if it puts her life, her relationship with Anakin on the line. She will always do the right thing, and I think it's something that she's so underrated for.
Oh yeah, I agree. The way she sticks up for herself and just basically takes lead, and she doesn't need anyone else's opinion or judgment. She's just like, I'm doing this whether basically like you said, whether it affects me or anyone around me. She's definitely a go-getter, and that's a good part for this story.
Absolutely. Let's move on to Master Kenobi. Famous mullet for this film. Our resident Jesus lookalike for this particular outing.
Space Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To me, I don't know how you feel about Kenobi in this film. Obviously, we can get to that in a sec. But for me, I feel like this is actually his weakest outing out of all of his Star Wars outings. I don't think he actually plays that really prominent role in this film. He doesn't have too much of an influence. It's just him kind of whining a bit about how Anakin never listens to him, and then goes off and does his own thing anyway. Probably his most important scene in this is when he has his chat with Count Dooku, I find, because he obviously, apart from, because we're going to get to it, because I want to chat about that, is sort of in conjunction with Django, but obviously when he goes to Geonosis. But, up until this point, he's not able to work out, what's going on with the Kaminoans, and he goes to visit them and stuff, and he's just not sure about what's going on. He obviously chases down Jango Fett, and then he's captured and has a chat with Dooku. And again, the fucking Jedi Council and Kenobi just refusing to believe that there is a larger Sith power at play. And literally, Dooku tells him everything.
Yeah.
He's like, there is a Sith Lord who is now in control of the Senate, influences all of them. They all do his bidding without even realizing it. I was never obviously sure whether Dooku was being honest about the fact that he was like, if you come and join me, we can stop him. Whether Dooku was trying to prime him to be a sort of his own apprentice and stuff like that. And whether they would actually be able to take down Palpatine. But yeah, for me, this was Kenobi's weakest outing by far. He didn't have a lot to do in this film, and what he did do was maybe not the right path that he took. What about you?
Yeah, those are, you nailed it. I think Obi-Wan, definitely besides his looks, this is the space guy right here. This is Jesus himself. A lot of people love this look of Obi-Wan, but I do have to agree, especially in episode 1, he's young. We get to see his arc just beginning, and you always love that for a big character. He takes down Maul, he avenges his master, and it's definitely a super, super sad moment. And then he has to take on a huge responsibility of a child who the Jedi Council doesn't even want. So basically going into episode 2, you're kind of like, well, if we're going to take this, few year, up to 10 years of a time jump, we're noticing that he has a huge responsibility, and we'll see how that leads up with Anakin. Obviously, the Anakin we just talked about is the Anakin we get. And, Obi-Wan, meeting Jango Fett, basically doing all the big roles that is needed to be done for the Jedi Council. And just the way that Dooku is like, hey, there's this guy, his name's Darth Sidious. He's behind all the scenes. Basically, it just told you everything, literally. So if you want to take that up, and then he's just like, nah, you're wrong. It's like, dude, come on, believe, like, at least think about it, at least be scared of that idea. And it's just like, I think that arrogance and that ignorance from Obi-Wan, it never sits well, rewatching it, because it's like, bro, literally, scenes before, he's talking with the Geonosians and has that hologram of the Death Star. I love that scene. That's just awesome. And knowing, that Palpatine is literally the missing piece. He tells him everything he needs to know, but just doesn't say that Sidious is Palpatine. It's so annoying. I love Obi-Wan. He's one of my top 3 characters, but that movie, it just doesn't sit well. It always pisses me off.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, him and the council, again, in this film, the overarching arrogance that they have, that they don't believe that the Sith have returned, or that they're there to basically have been doing what Dooku said they've been doing, is just unbelievable. It gets me every time. I mean, me in the fucking council and the prequels, they piss me off no end. And unfortunately, Kenobi seems to be a bit of an extension of them in this film in terms of how he acts and how he thinks. Did it always strike you a bit stupid as well, though, in the fact that he couldn't work out, when obviously he's looking to try and find Kamino on the map and it's deleted, and he can't work out. He's like, why are all the planets and stars in the system going all towards this one point, yet there's nothing on the map? And he has to take it to the room of kids training with Yoda, and for one of the kids to point out, it's not there, even though everything's going around it, because someone deleted it. And it's like, could you not work that out on your own?
Yeah, come on.
Did it really take a 10-year-old to tell you that?
I think the best part of that scene too is when Obi-Wan, or Yoda, laughs at Obi-Wan, kind of like, yeah, this is it's pretty, you just explained it. Come on.
Oh, that always gets me. That Kenobi wasn't the greatest of. And there are some great deleted scenes from this film. That I think it seems to be the case more and more nowadays. Obviously, this is 20 odd years ago, but if 1 or 2 deleted scenes were put into the film, and they're only like 30 seconds long, it would give a bit more explanation, a bit more gravitas to certain situations. And that bit when he's in the because we don't get a lot of explanation about Dooku. We just know that he's a former Jedi that left.
Yeah.
And he seems to have now turned. And there's a bit when he's in the library looking at his statue in the Jedi library, and Jocasta Nu comes out, and they're having a quick chat about him and talking about how he's one of the was it the 20 Fallen or 13? I can't remember if it's 20 or 13 that they was talking about. I think it's 20 Fallen. They call them the 20 Fallen, which is like 20 people that have actually left the Jedi of their own free will and rejected them and gone off to do their own and left the Order, sort of like as Ahsoka does in Clone Wars. And that Dooku's one of them. You need a bit more explanation. But speaking of Dooku, let's move on to him. Brand new character for this episode, for this film, sorry. Fantastic character, in my opinion, played by the great late Christopher Lee, who, as I found out not too long ago, was real life friends with, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, maybe you'll correct me, the actor that played Moff Tarkin.
Peter Cushing.
That's it. They were real life friends.
Oh, wow.
And so the fact that they both played sort of Star Wars villains, but obviously a long time apart, is just a little cool side note, to be fair. But Dooku in this film, hit me with your thoughts.
Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee were both in Dracula, weren't they?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay. They that's a long friendship too. Leading up into the late 90s, early 2000s, for directing. But another fun fact: Christopher Lee is actually, I saw a thing on Instagram, and he's like one of many to do this, but like the last to do it. So he's actually seen the last public execution used with guillotine.
Yeah.
I seen that, and then also he like served in the war at some point and was like a huge role actually, like in the war. And it's just like, man, this dude is done and seen some shit.
Oh yeah. Christopher Lee has been around and definitely done some stuff. Yeah, I remember the guillotine fact. I think it was France, wasn't it? You saw the last public beheading with a guillotine in France or something. So
yeah, I was just like, oh my god, dude, this guy. And then he gets beheaded in the freaking.
Yeah.
It's like, what is going on, man? But Dooku, love the character. I'm finally happy I get to add a Count Dooku Funko Pop into my collection. The Walgreen exclusive from Revenge of the Sith is so expensive. You can't get on eBay without getting it for at least $50, and that's just crazy. But it someday maybe. But Count Dooku in Episode 2, it's cool that we get no background of a character, but we get just a little spritz. We get to understand this character fresh. I do think it's really cool that he's in that Jedi lineage of the Skywalker, going from Yoda to Dooku, to Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and all the way down the line. But it's awesome that he knows that he can use Qui-Gon in a factor, to understand and to get under the skin of Obi-Wan, hoping that works. And besides Episode 2, I do love the Dooku aspect of Tales of the Jedi. I thought it was better than the Ahsoka episodes, in my opinion. I love to see that Obi-Wan finally knows, or we see that Obi-Wan was wrong. The Dooku did go in there and just wipe it out, and it's. I think he is the most interesting character, because when we're talking the dark side on my podcast, me and Bailey were talking about how prominent of a role Dooku plays, and especially dying at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, just everything he does with Palpatine. And he's also a pawn. Palpatine plays all of his Padawans, or his apprentices, but it seemed that Dooku has that edge to everyone. You think, could Maul beat Dooku? It's like, I'm on Dooku. Could Qui-Gon beat Dooku? It's like, I'm taking Dooku. Could Yoda and Dooku? We get to see it, and it ended in a draw almost. So, I mean, it's just Dooku is so strong with the Force, and the way his character is portrayed. Big shout out to George Lucas on writing a beautiful character. It's you get goosebumps thinking about Count Dooku and the what ifs for him and what could have happened if he didn't die. So I mean, great character. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic character. And I love that as the lore has gone on since Episode 2 came out for his character, that he has been pretty much established as one of the finest swordsmen of not only just this generation but of all time. A lot of them say his fighting style, his fighting stance was the most eloquent, but also the most combat effective, because he had that ability to work out the weaknesses of others and use the Force to his advantage in that respect of highlighting his opponent's weaknesses and then being able to exploit that. But just his elegant what he does when he ignites his saber as well. I don't know who came up with that, but it's a beautiful little thing. And I know that in Episode 2, even though he couldn't, obviously, because of his advanced age at the time, I think he was in his 70s or something when he was doing that. He couldn't obviously do too many of the fight scenes. And we do see in his battle with like Kenobi and Anakin a lot of close-ups. Because obviously he could just do the stuff up close. He couldn't do too much of the actual running around, and they had a stunt double to do that for him, bless him. So, but still, the fact that he was so eloquent when you properly see him with a lightsaber, I think is fantastic. And we get to obviously see more of it in animated stuff, like you said, in terms of the Jedi, Clone Wars. It just adds more. This is what I love about the fact that you can do all this stuff with the main films and then go back and fill in the gaps afterwards. So many things try and flesh out their story in a film, and it just doesn't work because you either have to cut stuff out or you're concentrating too much on them and not other stuff. And the fact that you can then go back and do all these comic books and TV series and stuff that fill in all the gaps, and Dooku's one of those that's had a lot of fill-in, and he's deserved it. He's been a fantastic character for a film and a bit to have that much rich background then as well.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what you got to love about any Star Wars character is how much they can play into roles that, you know, we don't see, you know, on screen or word of mouth stories. And, you know, shout out to, you know, Clone Wars, you know, like you said, you know, we get to see a lot of Dooku and the roles he played, you know, and I love the stories of, you know, Count Dooku and the Separatists going against the Night Sisters of Dathomir. I love that entire
Yes.
that entire story. It's just awesome.
I do not need my eyes to see you, witches. Absolutely fantastic. Sorry, that was my rubbish little Dooku impression. Let's touch quickly on a character because he doesn't actually have too much involvement in this film, but Palpatine, the man himself, the big bad, doesn't have a huge role to play in this film. Obviously, we just see him sort of having a few chats with senators here and there, and then his biggest bit, whereas him and Maz Amada sort of trick Jar Jar into voting him more executive powers. That seems to be his sort of biggest play in this film, which is just, you know, it is him just consolidating his power in the Senate, and then talking about the military, and then, you know, enforcing the fact that they then can use a clone army. But just not that much involvement in this film, but just laying that groundwork to consolidate his power before Episode 3. Much to say about Palpatine in this one?
Yeah, he is kind of, you know, the shadow figure, but ultimately plays, you know, one of the biggest parts in the film, behind the scenes. But what it like, especially at the beginning, you know, where he's talking to you know, Yoda, Mace Windu, and they're just like, you know, the dark side of the Force is, you know, clouding our judgment, and he's just like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you just don't know what you're talking about right now. And then they're just like, yeah, that's kind of right. And it's like, are you kidding me? Come on. He's right here. Like how, like, I know he's so powerful in the Force, and especially with the dark side, you know, it gives you all of these motives and different things that you can do strategically. But it's just like, are you Yoda? Come on. Aren't you the Grand Master? Like, you're the only one that has Grand Master. And it's just like, man, you gotta but it plays the story. You understand in the end, but it's just like, Episode 2 Palpatine just irks me. It's just like Obi-Wan, you know, it's like, come on.
Yeah, would have been nice to have a bit more of him in this film, to see that deviousness and that underhandedness. So they do it with a scene where they convince Jar Jar to be the one that steps forward and puts forward the emergency power idea. But apart from that, there's not much else to say really about Palpatine in this one. Could have done with a bit more of him, to be fair. I love Palpatine. I'm going to be doing an episode soon that's greatest on-screen heroes of all time. And just as a little sneak preview for anyone that ends up listening to that, Palpatine is in my personal top 4. And so for someone that appears in there, we're going to be covering that a lot more in the next episode that we do, but I would have loved to have seen so much more of him in this one. Because all of his outings we see before that, you know, Episode 6 and then Episode 1, you know, the two ends of his story, to be fair, at that point, in terms of where it started and ended for that time being anyway. It was just, he was so good and so underhanded and so sneaky with everything and well thought out and planning. He's just an absolute genius. And obviously in that episode, I will talk a bit more about why he's in my top 4. But my God, we needed more Palpatine in this for sure. Absolutely. Let's move on then to let's talk about Jango Fett.
I knew you were saying it. I knew it.
The Daddy Fett, as I think he should be called. You know, the clone template, or the template for the clones himself. Fun little facts, because I've been obviously like to put out some out there. The moon that Jango Fett was recruited on by Darth Tyrannus also happens to be the very same moon that Ahsoka and Rex crash into in the finale episode of the Clone Wars, where the Venator ship crashes and they obviously leave. They put all the helmets on the sticks, and she leaves her saber behind for Vader to find. Yep, that is the exact same moon that Jango Fett was recruited on to be the clone template. So
wow.
Nice little. I liked that fact when I found out about it. So because it kind of ties the start of the Clone Wars and the end of the Clone Wars together. in a little way. Whilst technically the Clone Wars didn't end on that moon, but the
Right.
series obviously does end there, and so it's a nice little tie-in for that one. So go on then, let's talk about Django. Hit me with it. I know you love this guy. Tell me about him.
I just learn stuff every time I come on your show, man. I always learn something and walk away with it. And I'm like, hey, look what I found today.
I am an uber nerd. Yes, that is correct.
Fets, man. I've always wanted to have a dog or a cat or something named Fett or Django. And, when you hear the word Django, people are like, oh, like the Django Unchained, yeah, that's a good movie. I'm like, no, Django, OG Django, Fett. But I love Tamora Morrison, great actor. I think he kills every single, role he gets. And gotta love him, coming back as Boba Fett. I think that's a great part for Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni's writing. It's really good, especially paying homage to those old characters, or old actors. But a young Tamora Morrison playing Jango Fett, it's really, really nice to see, that OG Mandalorian armor. And I love the parts where he's unarmored and he's at Camino and he's basically just kind of living his life, but he's kind of the way he cuffs his sleeves a little bit and shows that swagger when he's talking to Obi-Wan. I think that's really cool. And seeing all the clones being made, and obviously they have like a second character playing Tamora Morrison, and there's just millions of them. And to know that they looked at Jango Fett and were like, this is the guy that we need clones of, because it's a brute force, very talented with the dual wield pistols, a warrior, and then nonetheless Mandalorian. He was found when he was a child. He was a foundling, and he also served in the Great Mandalorian War. So a lot of callbacks for Jango, and he's definitely came from the bottom. So, and Din Djarin kind of has the same lineage and upbringing as Jango does as well. I think they kind of, if I'm just thinking to myself, I think they kind of did that on purpose. He was, family was killed, and then he was, rescued by Death Watch. I think that's really cool how they threw that in there. But for me, episode 2, other than Anakin and Padme and then Count Dooku, I think Jango plays a huge role, and definitely good for original trilogy fans to see this said character in Boba Fett, who was very short-lived and short screen time lived, throwing his father in and seeing a young Boba. It all makes sense character-wise. So I love Jango Fett. Great character.
And of course, we get the introduction of Slave One, seeing the original, obviously, Slave One before Boba took it over, which is always a great inclusion. Like you said, a short but sweet sort of character that we get in the film, because obviously gets beheaded by Mace Windu in the Battle of Geonosis. And I always love people always say, just right in the bit where Mace is running up to him, why doesn't he ever just try and fly away? And I always have to point out to people that, one, he just got trampled by, I can't remember the name of the animal, but the horned animal that was that trampled over in the bull before that, and does damage his jetpack, because just before Mace Windu swings, he tries to fire it, and you actually see it tries to fire, but it goes kaput. And so therefore he can't fly away and gets his fucking head chopped off. And the endless joke as well of when young Boba, then obviously we see that scene where he leans down to pick up the helmet and stare at it. And there's always the joke that did Django's head just pop out and fall out at the bottom of it, which would have made it slightly more brutal than it needed to be.
Yeah. Did you see the shadow of his head shoot out of the helmet as well when he got beheaded?
Yeah, I did see that, to be fair.
Because I always used to think about that. I'm like, well, that would be weird, why? Yeah, it's just a weird thing. Did you see, though, the extended cut of Jango actually getting beheaded by Mace?
The extended cut? I'm sure I must have.
If you haven't, I'll send it to you, or you can even look it up. But it's Windu, as he's charging him, he does a spin move, cuts off Jango's left arm.
Oh, yes.
Stabs his leg, and then does a spin move and then beheads him. So it's holy man, That I understand why they didn't go with that, because you kind of feel a little uneasy after, because you're like, oh my god, why do you do him like that?
But I mean, part of the reason why they did pick Django to be the clone template was because he wasn't just obviously a formidable warrior and one of the galaxy's most renowned bounty hunters. He had previously killed Jedi. So they wanted to have the DNA of someone who was a Jedi killer for the clones, because that was obviously going to be their ultimate plan, to use the clones to eliminate the Jedi. So they wanted to have someone who had that knowledge and ability to be able to take out Jedi. So can't really blame Sidious and Tyrannus for wanting to recruit him. A great clone template, and shame we didn't get to see too much more of him. It would have been nice to see a bit more of him elsewhere. In terms of like some of the animated stuff. So it's a shame really that we don't get to see too much of him before that, or ever. So fleeting appearances for a character that has had a lasting impact on Star Wars, given his role in this film. So I believe we have one last big character to talk about, Mr. Anakin Skywalker. He has a lot going on in this film. He rocks up at the start and goes full on crazy stalker mode on Padme. It's like, I've thought about you every day for 10 years. It's like, Jesus, mate, calm down. You've only just seen her. Just don't need to lay it on that thick straight away. And then they rock off to Naboo with him protecting her, and they have that fireplace scene. And of course, he's absolutely epic going on. So, and then obviously he gets the dreams about his mum dying, which is starting to show his power, that he's getting premonitions of the future. Rushes off to try and save her. Obviously, we get that little reunion scene with him and Watto as well. When Watto pretty much shits himself when he sees another Jedi standing in front of him after how it went last time. And then when he realizes it's Anakin, he's like, "Oh, cool, you can do me a favor." And Anakin's like, "I ain't in the mood for this bullshit. Where's my mum?" And obviously he goes to, and this is where we get Anakin truly starting down that path of the dark side, or the most prominent thing that we see anyway, isn't it? In terms of, his mum dies in his arms, and then he slaughters all the sand people, the poor Tuscans that were there. And not just the men, but the women and the children. And Padme seems to have fucking no real reaction to this either, which is always hits me as a bit odd. Like, he's there, like, having a full mental breakdown, telling it, screaming how he killed all of them, not just the men, but the women and the children, and how he hates them. And she's just like, "Come in for a cuddle. It's fine. It's fine."
Yeah.
That was fucking weird reaction, I think. But Anakin obviously then, he gets his moment with Padme at the end where she tells him that she loves him. They have a kiss and a smooch, and then he spends the Battle of Geonosis protecting her for the most part. And then he has this big showdown battle at the end with Dooku, when we see his rash, arrogant, overconfident side, when obviously Kenobi's like, "We'll take him together." He's like, "I'm going to take him now!" And just goes for it and gets his ass whooped straight away with Force Lightning, and obviously loses an arm as well during this battle. He held his own for about a minute with Dooku before Dooku chops his arm off. Just going to show how far he really had to go. And this always makes me laugh as well, the fact that, okay, well, most people around Anakin kind of knew after, for the most part, of the Clone Wars about him and Padme. Kenobi obviously knew, Rex knew, and you suspect that probably Yoda knows. But you ever notice that bit that after Dooku's escaped and Anakin and Kenobi kind of get up, and Kenobi's hobbling because he's got his arm and leg injured, and Anakin's missing his arm. When Padme arrives, she runs in and she's like, "Anakin!" and runs straight up to him and sort of like embraces him, like they're touching foreheads, wraps her hand around his head. And there's just fucking Kenobi and Yoda just stood next to them, just ignoring the shit out of them. And I'm just like, did you not notice this going on? Like, was that not slightly suspicious for you that something was going on there?
Come on!
And these two just had almost a lover's embrace without physically kissing in front of you. And does that not give you some clue that some shit was going down? Come on, Yoda, sort your shit in the council out. Come on.
Right, yeah.
And then obviously they get married at the end in a lovely ceremony in Italy. Sorry, I mean Naboo. But Anakin Skywalker has a pretty traumatic episode for this particular film, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. The way they go in and meet Jar Jar once again, and then finally Padme. And like you said, Obi-Wan knew it, but Obi-Wan, I feel like, would have been, the biggest hypocrite because, he was kind of the same way with Satine. So I he definitely, has that respect for Anakin, but at the same time, it's just like we have a job to do. And I love how Obi-Wan always says that to Anakin is we have a job to do, and so do they. So let's do our thing and then, do your thing later. But Anakin definitely, has the young kid. I mean, we've been there, the way your emotions are just up and down and you think everything is just set on, one person, but truly you have zero idea what's going on. And I think that's what Anakin's going through at first. And then definitely, with the trauma of, not seeing his mother every day to, seeing into the future and seeing that she's in trouble. And that obviously sets up, and we get to see Anakin show some dark side tendencies, which is really awesome to see with Jedi, because they're humans at the end of the day, they're going to be mad. And Anakin definitely showed that. So seeing that and getting that full closure, he finally got to see his mom again, but he would never see her again, just knowing that it's just kind of tragic. And then obviously Qui-Gon reaching out through the Force, like trying to get him to stop, but obviously it was too late. So you kind of have that weight of Anakin's character, sitting and until they get to Geonosis and the dude breaks his freaking lightsaber. So you do all this stuff, you kill Tuskens, and then you lose your lightsaber, and then it's like, oh, Obi-Wan's gonna kill me, and it's like, oh my god, some of these punchlines are so bad with Anakin, but I get it, and I love Hayden, great actor. But, leading into the Battle of Geonosis, after having all that time with Padme and they finally come together and it's almost official that they're a thing right before they go out to the, Coliseum and they share a kiss. And it's just like, all right, it's only up from here. So we're just going to expect that Luke and Leia might be coming at the end of this episode. But yeah, obviously their, wedding in Italy, like you said. I've seen a lot of people on social media go there and kind of reenact the ceremony scene. I think it's pretty cool. That's awesome. But yeah, Anakin definitely has, the huge up and then a huge down all of a sudden. And it's just definitely good for the character of Anakin Skywalker. So, I mean, if there wasn't an episode 2, Anakin definitely wouldn't be the guy we see turning into Vader. So
this is true. Yeah. Whilst obviously there was 10 years of stories in between episode 1 and 2 that start his journey's always been obviously destined to go down that route anyway, to Vader, sorry, but obviously the bits in between that we don't necessarily get to see and that are filled in by books and comics and some of the novels, I think, the original novels that came out, the prequel films, obviously expand a lot more on how those characters are feeling at certain moments, and especially for episode 3, which we'll get into next time. But in terms of, Anakin's journey obviously does start here, especially since, I always like to think about, when he said in episode 1, when he leaves his mum to leave with Qui-Gon, he was always like, I will see you again, Mum, I promise. But then the next time he actually sees her is the time when she dies in his arms. And that obviously just fuels that rage that he wasn't able to save her and he never got the chance to go back for her, and stuff like that. So I think he always resented the fact that the Jedi never went back or never freed his mum in the first place, didn't he? And this was always a sore point for him with that, but the Jedi never would have accepted him to the Jedi Order if his mum was still there with him, would they? So it's kind of like you never would have gone down that path if your mum had come along at the same time. So it's really, I always feel bad for him in this episode because it's super sad. You can feel bad for him in the fact that how he's manipulated into turning to the dark side in the first place and stuff. But to me, this is a really sad episode because I feel like no one takes him seriously enough. He's still looked on as a whiny, emotional, unbalanced teenager in this film.
Right.
And he's not quite given the seriousness that he's not treated with the seriousness that he maybe needed to get past some of these issues and start flourishing. I mean, Kenobi has said plenty of times that he, in due respect, he wasn't necessarily the right person to train Anakin. He couldn't help him with some of the issues that you had. But yeah, I always feel sorry for Anakin in this episode more than any other episode, because I think he's so mistreated in this episode. He's
I
absolutely
agree.
manipulated the fuck off out of in episode 3, which I said we'll get to. But I just feel in terms of sadness, I feel more for Anakin in this episode than any other because he's just not treated how he should be, and it's always a shame for me that this is the story that starts him down the path to, or the final stretch of the story that leads him down the path towards episode 3. Because we see in the Clone Wars, what I love about the Clone Wars is how much more context it does add to Anakin, but at the same time, it's obviously they just take the breadcrumbs of episode 2 for his journey to start down the dark side, and how he then uses that throughout the Clone Wars as well, and the fact that he's quite happy to force Choke prisoner, or beat the shit out of a guy who's hitting on Padme. Rush Clovis, I believe his name was.
Yep, Clovis.
That smarmy little bastard. And he's like, I don't need the Force to beat you. I've got a metal hand. So yeah, I absolutely feel for Anakin in this film.
Oh yeah.
Anyone else you wanted to touch on in terms of characters from the film?
I think we kind of covered the characters. I will say, in my opinion, the best sound in all of Star Wars comes from this very episode in a nice Slave One seismic charge.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you're not wrong in that one. And I always thought this one sounded better than the one that they gave us in The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't know why. The one in The Mandalorian doesn't quite sound the same to me.
It's like not as bassy.
I think maybe, this could be the science nerd in me coming out again, but the fact that the one in this episode is done in space, so it's a lot clearer, crisper sound, whereas the one in The Mandalorian is done on a planet, essentially, or just up in the sky of a planet. So there's more disturbance, more air disturbance. It wouldn't sound as crisp as maybe it would do in space, even though technically space is a vacuum and sound shouldn't travel. So sorry, the science not only coming out again, but
that is true.
But maybe that's why we got a slightly crisper sound out of it. So
yeah, it's also a movie too.
Rocking. It is absolutely rocking sound. To be fair, so
oh yeah.
Your overall thoughts then on the plot for this film. So the whole story from the assassination at the beginning to Palpatine consolidating his power, to Anakin and Kenobi sort of splitting up and doing their own missions, resulting in the Battle of Geonosis and the start of the Clone Wars.
If I was to rate it like on a scale, I think I'd give the movie a solid 7 out of 10. I think it is very rewatchable, but at the same time, when you really think about the overall plot, there are some holes, of course. But, you get to understand the dynamic of Anakin Skywalker, like we've said. We understand why he becomes Vader. This is like the big first step into being Darth Vader. It comes from this episode. Luke and Leia. Their entire lineage starts in this episode. That's where the love sparks. Obi-Wan failing Anakin, you can kind of understand, the way Obi-Wan takes those initial steps into how he kind of snarks at Anakin. You can see how, Anakin doesn't want to listen to him. And pretty much overall, the demise of Count Dooku, him wanting to, recruit Obi-Wan and that not working. You can kind of think like, does Palpatine feel that he's reaching out to others to maybe overthrow him? But also, I think with Count Dooku asking Obi-Wan to join him is kind of a throwback to the famous scene of Vader asking Luke to join him. I think it was just kind of like a prequels version of that. But I do love it. And I think the characters in Attack of the Clones, we get to see, old Dex, Diner Dex. You got to love him.
Yeah.
Zam Wessel's a cool character, as a changeling.
Yeah.
And a young Boba Fett. I can't go wrong there, and I know others can't as well. And then, Papa Fett. And I think the Kaminoans are really cool characters. I think they're a unique species. And Kamino live action, you can't go wrong. But overall, the plot, I'd probably have to stick with a 7 out of 10. It's rewatchable. Yeah.
In terms of all 11 Star Wars films, so not just the Skywalker saga, but throwing in Rogue One and Solo as well. Where do you put Attack of the Clones on your list of? Obviously, it's not top 3, but where does it fit in your overall ranking list?
Out of 11, I think I'll go 7. You got to have Rogue One in there over. I think the first 6 original episode 1 through 6, those are the top 6. But pulling out Attack of the Clones and inserting Rogue One.
Fair. I think that's a fair assumption. So, well, that's it then. That's our review of episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, as you did for episode 1 for this. Next up in our Star Wars review, we are going to be doing episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. I cannot wait to be talking about this with you. But in the meantime, man, tell everyone at home exactly where we can find you. By the way, actually, before you do that, tell us, how is your new podcast going? For anyone that doesn't know, Clan Brandolorian has a new podcast that he's doing with one of his friends. Remind me of his name?
Bailey,
that's it. Sorry, I'm terrible with names off the top of my head. But you're about, 5 episodes in now?
We just uploaded the 7th.
Oh, 7th, sorry.
It's been quick.
Bad. I'm a couple behind then. Because I only get to listen to stuff to and from as I'm going from work. So trying to catch up with you and a couple of others. It's been a great one so far. I've been really enjoying your podcast. How's that been going?
Yeah, I felt like at first, Bailey and I have talked off camera. So, when you're talking, for the first time, you don't want to do everything more so scripted. You kind of just want to have plot points and then just discuss, because we're not, putting on a Broadway show or anything. So, but it's going good so far. I'm excited. We're, getting some guests on, we're going to have you on there as well. So looking forward to branching out and then bringing more Star Wars fans in, because that only opens up your mind and you learn new things and you discuss more different things. But like I said, it's going the way I want it to. Very, very chill. And that's basically the vibe I want for the Clan Brandolorian podcast. But yeah, it's going good.
Nice. I'm really glad to hear it, man. Tell us where we can find it.
It's basically, we're running YouTube, and that's what we're trying to get all of the podcast video and audio onto. And we do have it on Spotify as well, but everything, all social medias, YouTube and Spotify, it's all Clan Brandolorian. My name's Brandon, and I love Mandalorians, and it rhymes, so you got to run with it. I was thinking about doing Brando Calrissian, but I didn't really like that.
oh no, I love that. That's great.
But I was thinking, I love Billy D. Williams. He's awesome. But I couldn't, take his character. So I just kept it real simple and Mandalorian clans and just flip the name. So Clan Brandolorian, get it stuck in your head. Come check us out. That's where we are.
Absolutely. I will be back next week with something new to discuss with you. But everyone, until then,
unlike Sam,
the Force will be with you, always.
Thanks for tuning in to the Galactic Core Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. But until next time, go get your geek on.